Okay, so the first question is, what are your earliest memories of joy and happiness that you can remember?
Okay. I had really happy life. I enjoyed most everything around me. Uh, I remember as about a 4-year old making a trip with my mother and father to see some of our relatives that lived in Arkansas. And I remember they're going fishing. I got to go out there where they were going fishing. And I remember they caught some catfish that were taller than I was as a 4-year-old. And I thought, man, that is something. I like fishing. So most of my early life, since I lived on a creek, I could just walk out the back door down and go fishing. And of course, the big fisherman, was Jesus, and they called Peter the big fisherman. But of course, he wanted us to be fishers of men. So I guess that he wanted me to learn how to throw the bait out and hook the fish and reel him in.
Right.
And so it was happy. I remember on that trip, and this is when I was about 4 years old, of my father and mother somewhere along the line bought me a play lawnmower, one of these old rotary type, no gasoline engine or
Right.
electric engine on it. It's a little push mower that's just my size. And so I would push it around. And I think my father and mother would put me in training to mow our yard. And he taught me how to mow the yard with a regular mower when I got bigger. But it taught me a good work ethic on how to work. And it wasn't all easy. The yard was kind of divided into the front yard and the side yards. And my grandmother's house was right next door because my father's father was killed when he was 14 years old by a fellow who had a beer joint and shot him with a .45 pistol. They were good friends, but when this man, his friend would get drunk, he would become mean drunk. They're jolly drunks and they're mean drunks.
Right.
And he would become mean, and somewhere they got an argument. I think it was over the fact that this is some of my memories of the joy being mixed with the hardship of my father having to take over when he was 14-year old, the care of his 2 younger sisters and his younger brother and his mother. A lot of other joys that I had a lot of friends, and life is made up of good friends. My parents tried to impress on me not to make close friends with those who were doing wrong, but to make good friends and close friends of those who were the right kind that did right.
Right.
And I might move on. There's a lot of other joyful things in life, but I grew up in a small town of about 2,500 people, Belton, Texas, in Bell County in Texas. And there was just a lot of early history there. There was part of it. Part of the hardships of my early life, I remember it was when I was young. I was born in 1925. In 1929, when I was 4 years old, the Great Depression hit America. and everybody seemed to be hit by the Great
Depression.
upheaval, financial drop of where a penny was worth like $1,000 now. You know, it was a hard time, and it was harder for some, for others that had lines of where they fed people because they couldn't find work. There was nothing in the economy that would give enough men and very few women worked outside the home then, but it was very deep hardship. And illustration, my father had a restaurant, but I remember going to school and the teacher spoke to those. Now, those of you who do not have any food, let us know so we can put you in the lunch program, you know, and feed you. Well, I had food because my father had a restaurant, but I felt left out. I felt deprived because I wasn't deprived. And so I signed up for the lunch program. And they called my parents and said, your son says he wouldn't sign up for the lunch program. And my father and mother explained to me that they had enough food to feed me.
Right.
And I remember in that hardship, my father, if someone came in hungry, he would at least give them some cornbread and soup. And I was impressed with that and sometime he would get them to do a little work because of the ethics of their having a sense that they earned what they got. Everything wasn't given to them on a silver platter. Hardship. I remember when I was about 4 years old, I'm talking about real early memories, that it was during the days of the gangsters, of lots of shooting and robberies and going on. And Bonnie and Clyde, Barra, and many others of the major name gangsters in the late 1920s and the early 1930s during the Depression. But Bonnie and Clyde seemed to be outstanding. Well, I was about 4 years old, and my parents always, when my father and mother would come home from working at the cafe, they would sit on the front porch, and my father would smoke a cigar as relaxation, and he didn't inhale, he just puffed it, you know. And every evening they'd sit on the front porch because it was very hot, you know, during the summer. And this car drove up in the front, and people called my father and mother out, and they walked out, but my parents kept telling me to stay on the porch, stay on the porch, stay on the porch.
Right.
But I kept getting close. I found out later that was Bonnie and Clyde Barra, Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barra, that had driven up in front of the house, and they were looking for the local town gunsmith because they would drop off their guns when they needed work, and this gunsmith would fix them. And they'd drop by and pick them up, but they came by one night and they didn't know where he lived, and it was dark and after shop closed, and they wanted to know where this gunsmith lived. And my parents kept pushing me away. They was afraid for me and afraid for themselves, I'm sure. But I didn't see any anger or anything displayed by them, but it's just about a block's distance from our house. Our house, when you were going north, it was up a hill. I'd ride up and down that hill on my bicycle when I got. That was one of my joys. And I had a dog named Dickie Don, and I had a ooga, 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 a type ringer or horn on my deal. And I'd ring that, and as far as that dog could hear, he would come to wherever I, if I was coming home from school. But it was up the hill where the gunsmiths lived at the top of the hill. And I remember that house was just about one house away from where General Walker, who used to command the 24th Division during the Korean War, and General Walker was killed, I think, in an automobile accident or vehicle accident in Korea. But that was his old home place of the general there. But right next to it was this gunsmith. And so the Bonnie and Clyde went on up there and I guess got theirs. Later they were killed, they were ambushed. And in the hardship section of my early memories, I remember when they were ambushed, they used to have shootouts with the police officers and different officers. And they drove an old model of a Ford. And the thing in those days, the Ford made their bodies out of real thick metal. And the 38, keep on?
Yes.
Okay, the 38 calibers wouldn't penetrate that Ford metal. And so they continued to survive. They finally ambushed them, found out where they would be through a relative or something or friend, of where the Bonnie and Clyde would show up and what road they would probably come down. And so they set up an ambush. Now, Clyde Barre's favorite stick-up weapon was not just a pistol, but was a BAR, the Browning automatic rifle that was famous in World War I as well as World War II. It was automatic, 30-06. But the officers finally got smart and they set up the ambush, and they had, all of them had this BAR, which would penetrate. And so when Bonnie and Clyde came down this little road, well, they spoke to this fellow who was betraying, and then that fellow got away. And just as he got out of the line of fire, well, they opened up with those BARs and killed Bonnie and Clyde. So that's some of the hardships of depression. Hardship, also my father, I remember during the Depression years, he was in partnership with two other men, a three-way partnership in the restaurant. His father had a restaurant. Of course, he was killed. He had some support of his family. He was left. And his first job was shining shoes. And his second job, as far as I know, was he worked in a hotel. And then somehow he became a partner with his two other men. And my father and mother were real frugal, and they saved their money even Depression. And they bought out one partner and left one partner. And then they kept saving money, and they bought out the next partner until he owned his own business. For 32 years, he ran his own restaurant through hardship and saved his money. And I remember every night they would figure the books of what they took in, what they had to pay out. They kept very simple restaurant income in and expenses out. And they would decide how much they would put in the bank of their earnings, you know.
Right.
And so it was hardship years. Things began to get better at the end of the Depression and the beginning of World War II. And it was located, the restaurant was located within 21 miles of Fort Camp Hood then. It later became Fort Hood. I got my basic training for World War II there. But the soldiers on the weekends, they would come to Belton, 21 miles, ride the bus in, or come by air. They'd thumb a ride, you know, free ride. And they'd come in and they would be lined all the way down more than a block away, waiting to be fed. and we fed them consistently. Then I went into the service myself. Went to Texas A&M, was in the Corps, and trained in military training there, and then went into World War II. And we're on the
Let me pause for a second.
Pardon?
Let me pause for just a second.
okay. So you okay? We just started on our earliest memories, and we went to the happy times and to the hard times. Now we'll move on to what are 2 or 3 things that I learned or brought away from my time serving our country. One is, I didn't originate this statement, but it's true. War is hell. There's nothing good about it that I can recall. There are a lot of times we laugh, but we laughed about funny things, which was really bad things. Like we laughed about when one of the men who was a scout, a Japanese sniper, hit his helmet right in the middle, and there's a liner on the inside, and the bullet went around on the end, topped it, and it came out the back and blew a big hole in the back. And we laughed about that because they wanted to give him a new helmet. He said, "No, I want to keep this one. This is my lucky helmet." And sometimes we would laugh after bad things happened, to release the tension of combat. Combat, I'm still suffering. I received the Purple Heart, was wounded one night behind the machine gun, where I was watched behind the machine gun, and with a rifle in cradle in my arms, because unless it was an all-out attack, we would just shoot the individual rifle rather than open up the machine gun. I was sitting behind it, and a mortar shell dropped off to my left, probably at most 15, 20 feet to the left. It killed at least 1 or more people on my left. My sergeants were laying on top of the ground. I was in a Japanese trench that we'd taken over. We usually dug foxholes, which all in all, they were more protection than a Japanese trench, because anywhere you're lined up and explosion, if you were in a line with several, guys, but this mortar shell hit right on the edge of that Japanese trench, killed some of my left. My 2 sergeants, my platoon sergeant, and my machine gun section sergeant was right behind me, laying on the ground. The bad thing about it was they were getting ready to go home the next day, and we'd had 10-in-1 rations. Rations went from good to bad, or from bad to worse. And we had K rations, that was our light rations we carried on a daily basis. We had 3 little wax packages. One was our breakfast, one was our lunch, and one was our supper. Then we had C rations, which was in a can, and a little bit better quality. But man, you were living high in combat if you got 10-in-1 rations. Well, someone, because the sergeants were going home, had given them 2 boxes of 10-in-1 rations, and fed 10 men. Well, about 4 of us ate for the 10 men that night. Then they said, "You take first watch on machine gun," so I was behind him. And when that went on, I found out after I woke up, I was knocked out, that my 2 sergeants right behind me, laying on the ground. The reason they were on the ground right behind me was they would direct fire, so that I'd know. They would spot places, and they'd say, shoot here, shoot there, or whatever. And they were both killed instantly. And I was wounded, I had that M1 rifle in my arms like this, ready if there were just individual enemies trying to slip up and get in with us and kill us, or come through the lines. And then we had the machine gun if there was a mass attack. I woke up in the bottom of that Japanese trench. I don't know how long I've been knocked out. But when I woke up, I was on my back looking up, and I saw a soldier up there. I could see they had a rifle in their hand and spraddle-legged over it. I didn't know whether it's Japanese or American or what. And so I started feeling around for my rifle, and I couldn't find it. And make a long story short, the man spoke, and I spoke back, and he said, "I've been hunting for you. We didn't know whether you were killed or were still alive." Well, I remember when the mortar shells hit, I remember saying one thing, "Oh God." And then I felt like I drifted off. I had this kind of out-of-body experience of a light. And then I woke up on the bottom of the trench, and this fellow spoke. And he helped get me out of the bottom of the trench, and they took me back to the center of our perimeter. We usually form at night in as much of a circle as we could. And so we could fight off attacks from all directions with a small number. And the next morning, it began to get daylight, and I was back in the trench. And I wondered what happened to my rifle. And it had been blown out in front of me, way out there in front of me. And the next morning, they brought an ambulance to pick me up. I was the only live person that went back in the ambulance with all of these dead bodies of my soldier friends. And they took me to the hospital, field hospital. And I stayed there until they got me back and sent me back to the front again. So that's one of the lessons that war taught me 1,000 ways to kill people, but also taught me to do everything not to kill people. But there are situations in our life where people are just so mean and so bad that somebody has to stand up and be counted to, that's one reason that when they made it available for concealed carry that I took, I'm now on my 4th license. Both my wife and I, we are to protect ourselves from deadly harm, but also we're to protect others that may be in deadly harm's way. And so I believe in being armed. I believe that's a right under our Constitution. And you remember Jesus, when he spoke to some of the disciples, and one of them spoke up and said, "Lord, will I have this short sword?" And Jesus said, "That's enough." Well, it probably was enough to cut off the ear of the high priest servant, and that Jesus performed a miracle sticking him back on that servant's head, but it was necessary. But another thing I earned is a deepening feeling of the value of life. Not only, number one, because God made us, and God made us for fellowship with himself, and God has put the highest value on our life. He sent his only begotten Son to die for us on the cross, to show us that he loved us, and whosoever believeth in him should not commit spiritual suicide. That's what the word perish means. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish. It means to commit spiritual suicide, choosing to abandon God in your life. But the most wonderful thing in the value of life is Jesus dying on the cross and his Son and the Holy Spirit coming to convict us of sin, of righteous, a right relationship with God, and of that which is right in Jesus Christ. So the value of life, I came away with that lesson. And there are a lot of other lessons, is that as much as possible to live right. And by right is not what you think's right, it's what God's Word says is right. And to do it whatever it costs you. That's what Jesus taught us. He died for us. It cost him his life. And so if we're really living for Christ, it's going to cost us our life of living for him. It doesn't mean you're not persecuted. He said you'll be persecuted. So there are values, lessons that came out of the war. What is something you got right in your life? Well, I chose the right parents. Or they chose me. Anyway, I was fortunate to be born to Christian parents who loved the Lord. And I